The room was called Studio C. It sat on the east end of a production facility in Burbank, California, in the autumn of 1972. The space was large enough to hold a small aircraft, but that afternoon it held something considerably more dangerous. There were 11 people present. 3 were crew, 2 were producers. 1 was a stunt coordinator named Bob Wall, who had spent the better part of a decade building a reputation that most men in his profession spent entire careers reaching for. The rest were observers, invited, credentialed, and quiet in the particular way that people go quiet when they understand that something is about to happen and they are not entirely certain how it will end. The man who had issued the challenge stood near the center of the room. He was 29 years old, 6 feet and 1 inch tall. He weighed 212 pounds without shoes, which he was not wearing. He had competed in full-contact tournaments across 4 states and had not lost a professional match in 31 months. His reach extended 6 inches beyond what most opponents expected. He had broken 3 ribs belonging to other men in the previous calendar year, and he had done it cleanly, efficiently, and without apparent effort. His name is not what matters here. What matters is what he said, and to whom he said it, and what happened in the 19 seconds that followed. The man he said it to was standing near the far wall. He was not stretching, he was not bouncing on the balls of his feet, he was not shadowboxing or rolling his neck or doing any of the things that fighters do when they want to be seen preparing. He was standing with his arms at his sides, wearing a plain black shirt, canvas trousers, and flat shoes that belonged more to a Tuesday morning errand than to anything that was about to occur. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall. He weighed 138 pounds. He was 31 years old. To anyone who did not know, he looked like a production assistant who had wandered into the wrong corner of the building. But Bob Wall knew. The stunt coordinator set his clipboard on the edge of a folding table and did not pick it up again for the next 4 minutes. He would later describe what he saw in the following 19 seconds as the single clearest demonstration of applied fighting principle he had witnessed in 20 years of professional work. He said this quietly, once, and then did not say it again for 11 years. That is how these things travel. Slowly, carefully in the mouths of people who were present and understood what they saw. In 19 seconds, 3 movements and 1 sentence spoken just above a whisper, Bruce Lee was about to teach a lesson that no one in that room had enrolled in and no one would forget for the rest of their lives. Nobody standing in Studio C that afternoon knew they were about to witness something that would be recounted in gyms and backlots and production offices for the next 5 decades. If you want to hear what happened and what Bruce Lee said to the man on the floor afterward, stay with this until the end, to understand what occurred in Studio C. You have to understand what the man across from Bruce Lee actually was. Because the easiest mistake a person can make in a story like this is to assume the challenger was a fraud. He was not. He was the genuine article, and that is precisely what made the afternoon meaningful. He had begun training at the age of 14 in a gym in the San Fernando Valley that smelled of canvas and liniment and did not have air conditioning. His first instructor was a Korean national who had competed at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics and who ran his training sessions with a militaristic patience that broke most of his students within the first 3 months. This man did not break. He stayed for 4 years, and when he left, he was carrying something that most fighters at his level spend an entire decade accumulating. By 23, he had entered open competition. His record in the first 18 months was 22 wins and 1 draw, and the draw was the result of a judging disagreement that 2 of the 3 officials later publicly reversed. He worked combinations the way a skilled tradesman works a material he has spent years learning, without hesitation, without decoration, and without error. His front kick generated a measured force that a professor of biomechanics at UCLA, who had studied the technique during a research project the previous spring, estimated at 460 pounds per square inch at the moment of contact. He had trained with men who had trained with men who had been to war, and that lineage was visible in the way he moved. Deliberate, economical, loaded, he had been on the production lot for a different reason that day, a minor consulting arrangement related to a fight sequence that was being choreographed for a film in pre-production. He had met Bruce Lee once before, briefly at an industry gathering 18 months earlier. The meeting had lasted 6 minutes and had been entirely cordial. What had happened between that evening and this one What specific accumulation of professional pride and ambient competition had brought him to the point of saying what he was about to say is not entirely clear from the accounts that survive. What is clear is the fact of the statement itself and the circumstances under which he made it. The crew had broken for 15 minutes. Someone had brought coffee in paper cups. The stunt coordinator was reviewing a sequence diagram at the far table. Bruce Lee was near the wall, his arms still at his sides, present in the room the way a fixed object is present, without announcement. The challenger crossed the floor, and he said it clearly enough that 3 people heard it without difficulty from a distance of 12 feet. He said that the techniques Bruce Lee was known for were theatrical, that they worked on film because film was controlled. He said that in a real exchange, under real conditions, against a man with a real record, none of it would hold up. He said specifically that he could end a genuine engagement with Bruce Lee in under 30 seconds, and he said it in a tone that was not angry. It was something closer to professional assessment delivered without apology. He said it the way a structural engineer might note a flaw in a building, plainly, with the confidence of a man who had done the math and was comfortable with the result. The room changed. Not loudly, rooms like this do not change loudly, but the quality of the silence shifted. And the 3 observers near the table became very still, and Bob Wall set the clipboard down, and the coffee in the paper cups stopped being interesting. Bruce Lee looked at the man for a moment. Then he said 3 words. He said them quietly. He said, "Show me then, this is the point in the story where the outcome becomes inevitable to anyone who understands what Bruce Lee was." But on that afternoon in Studio C, in the autumn of 1972, there were only 11 people in that room, and not all of them knew. Before we get to what happened in those 19 seconds, if this channel gives you what you are looking for, subscribe now and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. We will continue in a moment. There is a principle in the understanding of physical confrontation that almost nobody teaches correctly, and Bruce Lee had spent the better part of 15 years arriving at a formulation of it that was by the early 1970s as refined as it was going to get. The principle is this: a fight is not a collision. A fight is a conversation about space. The man who controls the distance controls the entire negotiation, and the man who understands that controls the man who does not. Every technique, every feint, every shift of weight is a sentence in that conversation. Bruce Lee spoke this language at a level that only a handful of people on Earth had reached by 1972, and the evidence of that level was not his speed. Though his speed was extraordinary and has been documented, the evidence was what he chose not to do. He did not close the distance when the challenger began to move. He did not step back either. He adjusted. He moved at an angle, and the angle was 4 degrees from the line the challenger was traveling, and those 4 degrees changed everything about what came next. What the 3 observers at the table saw and what Bob Wall described when he finally spoke about it publicly in 1983 was the following. The challenger moved first. It was a committed step forward paired with a lead hand probe, a technique he had used effectively in tournament competition and which, by any standard technical evaluation, was correctly executed. His weight was properly distributed, his shoulder was behind the motion. It was a legitimate technique thrown by a man who knew how to throw it. This is important. It was not a mistake in execution. It was a mistake in understanding. Second one, Bruce Lee was not where the technique arrived. He had not retreated. He had simply ceased to be at that coordinate in space. And the adjustment had happened so early and so quietly that the challenger's lead hand found air that, a fraction of a second before, had been occupied by a chest. Bob Wall's hands came flat to the table surface. Not a reaction to violence, a reaction to comprehension. Second, 2. The challenger reassessed and committed to a second approach. This one was more assertive, a combination that opened with a right cross and transitioned to a body shot that had ended at least 6 of his professional engagements. He threw it with full commitment and with the timing that his record had validated across 31 months of competition. The producer standing 4 feet to Wall's left stopped breathing. He would report this afterward with mild embarrassment, but he would report it accurately. Second 2 continued. The cross arrived at nothing. The transition to the body shot began and did not complete. because the distance that had been there was no longer there, and the sequence that had worked 31 times in professional competition worked 0 times in Studio C. The challenger's weight was forward, and his backhand was extended, and the line between his chin and his sternum was briefly and entirely unguarded. This is the precise moment Bob Wall described most carefully when he finally told the story. He said the gap lasted less than half a second. He said that in all his years of professional work. He had seen 3 other men in the world who could have identified that gap in the time it existed. He said Bruce Lee was one of them. And then he corrected himself and said Bruce Lee was the only one he had personally witnessed do what he did with it. Second 3 through 7, Bruce Lee's right hand moved. The delivery system is not the point is the address. The strike was targeted at a point 6 inches below the challenger's left ear, a location that when contacted with the combination of speed and structure that Bruce Lee carried in that right hand, produces a very specific result. The result is that the body decides to go to the floor before the mind has been consulted on the matter. The strike did not land. It stopped. It stopped at a distance of 1 inch from the target, and it held there, extended, with a precision that was more difficult to achieve than the strike itself would have been. Bruce Lee's balance was perfect. His weight was exactly where it needed to be. His shoulder was locked, his elbow was aligned, the fist was stationary in the air beside the challenger's head. And the challenger was still upright, and for approximately 2 full seconds, which is a long time in a situation of this kind, neither man moved. The stunt coordinator did not move, the producers did not move, the 3 observers near the table did not move. The room was so quiet that the ventilation system in the ceiling of Studio C was, for the first time that afternoon, audible. Then Bruce Lee withdrew his hand. He stepped back. He stood, as he had been standing before, arms at his sides, weight evenly distributed. Nothing in his posture that communicated the last 7 seconds as anything other than routine. The challenger stood still for a moment longer. His hands came down. He looked at the floor for a moment, and then he looked up. And his expression had changed in the specific and recognizable way that a man's expression changes when he has been shown something that revises a belief he has held for a long time. Bruce Lee walked across the space between them. He stopped close enough that what he said next required no elevation of volume. He spoke 1 sentence, and only the challenger heard it. The people in that room would ask him about that sentence for years afterward, and he would describe it differently on different occasions, but the version he settled on, the one he gave to a journalist in 1989 during an interview about his career, was this: Bruce Lee told him that speed was not the point, that the point was the moment before speed, and that if he spent the next 10 years working toward that moment, he would understand everything. The challenger looked at him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. He said he understood. He did not make an excuse. He did not reference his record or the conditions of the room or the informality of what had just taken place. He said he understood, and he meant it, and the 2 men shook hands, and Bruce Lee walked back toward the wall. As he passed Bob Wall, the stunt coordinator put his hand briefly on Bruce Lee's shoulder. He did not say anything. Bruce Lee nodded once and did not look back. Stories like this one do not travel the way most people assume. They do not travel quickly. They do not arrive complete. They move the way water moves through stone, slowly in increments, through channels that are not always visible. Bob Wall told the story once in 1983 to a journalist writing a retrospective piece for a martial arts publication, and the journalist included 1 paragraph of it in a longer article, and that paragraph was read by approximately 40,000 people, a portion of whom were instructors and competitors who carried the image of that stopped fist into their own gyms and training halls and told it again, imperfectly, in the way that all transmitted accounts are imperfect. By the time the story reached its 3rd and 4th generation of telling, some details had grown and others had been lost. The challenger's record had expanded in some versions. The number of observers had contracted in others. One account placed the exchange outdoors, on a backlot in morning light. Another set it in a private dojo in Culver City during a late-night training session. The core of the event, the stopped strike, the whispered sentence, the handshake, survived every version intact. Accounts tend to lose their settings before they lose their centers. The center of this one was too clear and too specific to dissolve. the Challenger continued to compete for 3 more years after the autumn of 1972. His record held. His technique remained what it had always been, legitimate, precise, and effective in the context for which it had been built. He retired from competition in 1975 and moved into instruction. He ran a school in the Valley for 11 years and was, by all accounts from his students, a rigorous and generous teacher. He was asked about the afternoon in Studio C in a number of contexts over the decades that followed, and he answered the question the same way each time. He said it was the most useful 30 seconds of his professional life. He said useful, specifically not humbling. The distinction is its own lesson. Bruce Lee died in July of 1973, 9 months after the afternoon in Studio C. He was 32 years old. The films he had completed by then would go on to alter the vocabulary of physical performance in cinema so completely that the alteration is now invisible. It has been absorbed so thoroughly into the standard that its origin requires deliberate excavation to find. The fights in those films do not look like what they were before Bruce Lee. They could not have existed before Bruce Lee. The distance control, the economy of motion, the insistence on technique serving truth rather than spectacle, these were not stylistic choices. They were a philosophy committed to celluloid, and they were genuine. The stopped fist from Studio C appeared in no film. It was never photographed and never staged. It existed in that room for approximately 2 seconds in the autumn of 1972. Witnessed by 11 people, and then it was withdrawn and the moment was over. But the 11 people in that room left with something they had not arrived with, and they carried it through the decades that followed, and some of them passed it on, and here we are. Bob Wall spoke about it once more in a television interview in 2001. The interviewer asked him what the single most memorable thing he had ever seen in his career was. He answered without pause. He said it was a fist that stopped 1 inch from a man's head and held there perfectly still while the room around it was completely silent. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. There is a thing that Bruce Lee said in a different context, in a different year, that has the feel of something earned rather than borrowed. He said that the successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus. It is the kind of sentence that looks simple until you sit with it long enough to understand what it is actually describing. It is not describing intensity, it is describing the specific kind of presence that makes intensity unnecessary. The man in Studio C who threw 2 committed techniques and found nothing had intensity. What he found across from him that afternoon was something quieter and more dangerous. The gap between what a man believes he can do and what he can actually do is never wider than the moment of contact with genuine ability. The gap is not cruelty, it is information. What a man does with that information is the only thing that matters after the floor has been reached, or, as it was in Studio C, the moment after the fist that did not land has been withdrawn. The challenger shook hands and said he understood, and he meant it, and he taught for 11 years, and his students were better for everything he had learned in those 19 seconds and the 9 months that followed before the man who had taught him was gone. That is the shape of the story. It does not end in a tournament result or a belt or a record. It ends in a handshake in a quiet room, and a sentence spoken just above a whisper, and a man who chose to receive what he had been given honestly rather than construct an explanation for why it did not count. Next week we will look at the afternoon in 1969 when a reigning national champion walked into a closed-door session on a film set in Hong Kong and made a declaration in front of 14 witnesses that he would spend the next decade trying to take back. That story begins with a phone call, and it ends with something that a grip operator named Davis Chen wrote in a letter to his son 30 years later, and that letter is the reason we know it happened at all.